Another movie review for you. This is the Sand Pebbles, directed by Robert Wise, from a screenplay by Robert Anderson from a novel by Richard McKenna. The cinematographer is Joseph MacDonald, the editor William Reynolds, and music is by Jerry Goldsmith. Now to the cast. In the lead role is Steve McQueen. He plays Jake Holman. Richard Attenborough plays Frenchie. Richard Crenna is Lieutenant Collins. Candice Bergen plays Shirley Eckard. And Mariette Andrian plays Marley. Mako plays Paul Hahn. Gary Gates is Mr. Jameson. Simon Oakfield is Storsky. And Joseph Turkel plays Bronson. The movie was released in 1966. You need to have some stamina to watch this one. It's 3 hours plus. Steve McQueen deservedly received his only Oscar nomination for Best Actor in this movie. It's an epic war drama of a sort, and his heartfelt performance as the anti-hero certainly sticks out. We're in China and it's 1926, and there's a true political tale happening, a civil war between the nationalists, followers of Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists who are following Mao Zedong. And of course, the unification is their objective, and the country cleared of foreign influences. The crew aboard a US gunboat called the USS Sand Pebbles, nicknamed the Sand Pebbles, are there patrolling the Yangtze River to protect American interest in China. I'll go through my notes. The US political interest in China, as I said, amid an increasingly hostile civil war, which is very destabilising. That's what we're greeted with. Now, McQueen's a Navy engineer and he arrives in Shanghai. He's moved about a bit. This San Pablo is his 7th ship and it's a new posting. However, the surroundings in Shanghai are very familiar, and he goes to his regular place to rent a room, and you get a flavour of what's happening in that town at the time, as the reception area is littered with call girls who are free to accommodate the Westerners that decide to rent rooms there. We then get to guests that he meets at dinner. There's a mix of UK and US expats, and politics in China is on the agenda. The rise of the communists and their respective national interest in the region, and the role that the American government wants to carry on with. Small talk about how Jake became a new recruit crops up, and now he's a seasoned engineer. He's in love with engines, and his life appears relatively empty aside from his passion to do this job efficiently. He prefers to work on smaller boats and have fewer bosses and more delegated responsibility. Then move to the San Pablo, and as we go there, we get an insight as to the Shanghai street cacophony, and he then meets Frenchie, played by Attenborough, for the first time. Now, Holman's passion for engine design is such that he is very critical where he sees Chinese work details being carried out on this machinery. He immediately insists on having an assistant, which he calls him Shaver, and the script illustrates the racism endemic in US militaries crews, and this is seen by the routines with which they basically get the Chinese to do for them, and it's pretty abysmal how they treat them. and they hose down the sloppers. Holman is very anti this attitude towards the locals, and it's a piece of conflict that we continue to see throughout the movie. Clearly, he defines the duties for the Chinese, and it's a clear demarcation line as to what they will do and what US personnel will do. Krenner's in charge of this, and he represents the government's sense of duty for country, patriotism and all that. The greatest country in the world. And of course his patrols of the Yangtze River are very rigid. The cinematography, however, is superb, and the sets reflect the time period, late 20s, early 30s. From the off, Holman gets into confrontations with Krenner over the engineering duty, and Krenner's view of proceeding down the river with haste to the destination, irrespective of how the machinery is operating, causes a big problem. Holman sees it very much as political and bearing very little regard to the maintenance of the ship. And he also finds very early on some pretty poor maintenance as it leads to a Chinese death. This has followed long periods of neglect ignored by Krenner and the US personnel. And so there we have it. The two clearly conflict on their respective tasks and roles on the San Pueblo. Now to R&R, we get a picture of a place where the US sailors frequent. It's a hostess bar, and we then meet Millie, who is not one of the whores. She has a status which removes her from that. She's more about providing a service with her sort of pidgin English, and but then she becomes part of an auction at one stage by the Americans for her freedom vis-a-vis her virginity, and this is pretty abhorrent, and Frenchie finds it particularly distasteful, and he decides that he wants to remove her, and so he outbids the rest of the crew for her freedom. He takes the high moral ground, and he's very, very angry with the rabid males as he sees them, and we see the worst form of machoism in the armed forces when youth are free of any social and legal controls. Political upheavals, of course, run throughout the film. Chiang Kai-shek's control of the warlords, it becomes a significant factor. The rise of communism, and of course the colonial interests of both the British and the Americans, and it breeds an atmosphere of conflict, destruction, etc., etc., and that cultivates this wartime existence. And hatred is starting to spiral out of control against the white occupier, and the San Pueblo is thrust right in the middle, assigned to retrieve the US expatriates living along the river and working in China. So they are assigned to track down the missionary, two teachers there. Jameson's played by Gates and Shirley played by Bergen. Now Gates is very anti-imperialist, so here again we have potential difficulties down the line. But Holman and the crew are ordered to rescue them from possible death by the warring factions. And this then brings Holman and Shirley together for a potential romantic moment. but I'm afraid Holman's loyalty to his engines intervenes. So very little physical happenings occur. The film location manages to retain an interest in a script that perhaps is a bit mediocre. See the first of two rescues of the teacher and missionary, which is successful, but it isn't without incident. The Chinese capture the assistant to Holman, Po Han. Now Holman's apprentice is then tortured. There's a start of a torture on the bank of the river in front of the boat, forcing Holman to shoot Po Han as a mercy killing. This predictably is viewed as a racial killing, and the Pueblo has to leave in a hurry. The killing of Po Han impacts Holman considerably, and McQueen's performance becomes exceptional as he shows his animosity to Creda, his anger at having to take sides in a conflict that he doesn't believe in. His brief vulnerability with Shirley is seen also, and the incident with Po Han enables both sides to air their raw emotions, much of it racist. And the next stopping point on the river provokes even more conflict as the Chinese faction try to blockade the Pueblo, and they try to force their countrymen off the ship, and there is an ensuing fight. And aside from this, Frenchie, who of course is on board the ship, has now developed a love for Millie, and in the night he swims under darkness to the shore to be with her. Unfortunately, a side issue, he starts to become very ill and dies. The script to an extent sidesteps the internal strife with Holman and the crew, and switches it to rescuing James and Shirley as the warring factions again, with their anti-American feeling, ratchet up a few notches the degree of violence, and the movie focus turns to Holman as a brave hero, breaking their blockade and then risking his life for the sake of vulnerable others who are at risk from this warring enemy. The Chinese nationalists close in for the kill, and Hollywood's need to show its loyalty to American customers is very to the forefront here, and we have to go through the typical American being the good guys. The final hour of the film asks many questions about McQueen's character and the events that happen. We are asked, why is the US involved in this part of the year, which is totally alien to them? We witness conversations and questions about American nationality and its importance to the missionary. The man there is very anti-patriotic, and he rejects the premise and basically claims a stateless nationality to avoid being caught up in the idea that they are there to save his US citizenship. Holman makes a final choice at the end before the compound is overrun by the nationalists. Right, that's a very long review, I have to say. It's still worth seeing, although it is quite a stretch. There we have it then. That's my long review of the Sand Pebbles, released in 1966, starring Steve McQueen.